In a recent turn of events, large amounts of grocery stores have upended and left Chicago, as well as many other stores. And with this, we see that Brandon Johnson, the new mayor of Chicago, is claiming that what the city needs is government-run grocery stores. Because as we know, that did the Soviets just fine. I cannot believe that we're actually coming to this point, and what this actually comes from and stems from is crime. There's a major misnomer when it comes to the understanding of crime and poverty. Many people believe that poverty creates crime, but what actually happens is crime creates poverty. Because with the people who are law abiding citizens, they're willing to operate and not break the law, even if they're poor and destitute. But those who do not care and are willing to violate those laws, well, what happens is they're breaking into places like Whole Foods and they're stealing stuff in mass. They're stealing stuff from Walmart in mass, as well as many other of these large retail stores, which is why these places are having to shut down because they're eating such an overhead cost on their capital. And because of that, they can no longer sustain to afford to keep their business open, and that means they have to withdraw from the area. Thus, withdrawing from these places, making these people have to suffer from food deserts, which is what Brandon Johnson and his administration talk about. But here's the deal. These food deserts only happen because they do not address the root problem, which is crime. Let's go ahead and jump in and see how Brandon Johnson believes that the Soviet style of approach is really going to solve Chicago's food deserts. This all started with a tweet from the New York Post. Chicago mayor proposes city-owned grocery stores as Walmart and Whole Foods exits leave food deserts. And what's causing the food deserts? Well, it's crime. But I can promise you Brandon Johnson's administration does not understand that, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to tackle it because of how their approach is when it comes to dealing with crime. Let's go ahead and move on. We see from the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, it's nice of Chicago to sacrifice itself just to show the rest of America the results of socialism. And I'm going to have to agree, if you don't know anything about the results of socialism and the process of what happens when government controls top down, how food is distributed through a society, please go ahead and go look at the history of the Soviet Union or Cuba to understand the process of what happens that these people have to suffer through mass starvation. If you would like another example, please go ahead and look at Venezuela. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. And I see people complaining about stuff like this and talking about the fact, well, this is an example of a failure of capitalism. And there was a comment saying just that. They're addressing a failure of capitalism. And what I was going to say is effectively just this that abrogate authoritarian says. In a capitalist society, store owners would be free to defend their property from the hordes. This is a failure, but it's not capitalism. The term is anarcho-tyranny. For those unaware, anarcho-tyranny refers to armed dictatorships without rule of law or Hegelian synthesis when the state tyrannically or oppressively regulates citizens' lives. It is unable or unwilling to enforce fundamental protective law. And a perfect example of this is what is going on with the mass theft that is going on in places like California and New York that is driving out these businesses, and then the people that work at these businesses cannot even defend themselves or defend the job or the property that is being stolen from the job because they will then lose their status and be fired because it goes against store policy. And with this going against store policy, we see that the government will not even step up to defend you in the act that you are fired from your job for trying to defend yourself when you are being accosted by violent criminals while you are on the job. Let's go ahead and jump into these articles. This is the article from the New York Post. Chicago mayor proposes city-owned grocery stores as Walmart, Whole Foods exits leave food deserts. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said he wants to open city-owned grocery stores to serve neighborhoods that have become food deserts after Walmart stores and a Whole Foods have closed. Johnson announced this week that his administration would partner with the nonprofit advocacy group Economic Security Project to put stores in underserved areas of the city, a proposal Republicans called something out of a Soviet-style central planning. And the fact is that the Democrats do not see how this mirrors something that has happened in the Soviet Union or a place like Venezuela or Cuba is genuinely unbelievable. Top-down control and distribution of the food supply from the state never ends well. And as I've said, if you don't understand this, please go read the history of the Soviet Union. A great book on this would be The White Pill from Michael Malice. Moving on, we see 4 Chicago Walmarts are still open, with the chain said in a statement, continue to face the same business difficulties. And by same business difficulties, we are talking about the mass theft that has graced so many stores in Chicago. And what we see from this title, it says Chicago mayor proposes city-owned grocery stores. And then we move on to the Daily Caller. Chicago proposes municipally owned grocery stores as vendors flee rampant crime. At least they're actually telling you what's going on in the title. But CNN will never do that because it goes against the narrative. Let's go ahead and see what we have here. Why Walmart is closing half its stores in Chicago from CNN Business. What's this? As Whole Foods prepares to leave Inglewood, companies plan to open New River North store. Isn't that just unbelievable? They're trying to open up in nicer areas where there's less crime, where people will be able to actually consistently make transactions. They will not be stolen from en masse, and they will not be sent into the red when it comes to their financials. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip we have from New at 4 from MSNBC in Chicago.
A supermarket shocker. Whole Foods announces it's closing 2 Chicago area stores. NBC5's JC Navarrete spoke with customers and community leaders who are upset about the loss of the popular chain in their neighborhoods.
We get some positive and some nurturing into the community, and for some reason, it leaves. What is the explanation?
That was the question on everyone's mind. Whole Foods announced it's closing 2 area stores, including their Inglewood location and the DePaul University Welcome Center. Shoppers like Jashay Tates regularly use the Inglewood location. Now she'll have to find an alternative.
Inconvenient now because this was a good spot to shop to. There'll always be McDonald's and Wendy's and food that we don't really need to keep intaking all the time.
Whole Foods is closing a total of 6 stores across the country. No timetable was given for the closures. They tell us in part, we regularly evaluate the performance and growth potential of each of our stores, and we have made the difficult decision to close 6 stores. Community leaders in awe today at the decision to close the store.
Inglewood, we have experienced school closures, scavenger sales, vacant buildings, abandoned lots, and we still rise. If a corporation like Amazon does not find the incentives in us, someone else will.
6 years ago, there was such a buzz about bringing Whole Foods to the Inglewood neighborhood that former Mayor Rahm Emanuel and the city allocated $11 million to bring it there. Now neighbors tell me they're disappointed and concerned for what comes next.
This whole area is a pretty good little mini mall for us, so that we can have access to the good things that we need. We shouldn't have to go to other neighborhoods to have access to good things.
JC Navarrete, NBC5 News.
Perfectly explained by those people that are actually suffering from losing their modern amenities that they operate and use on a daily basis, probably. Stuff like Whole Foods, a Walmart, other grocery stores being stripped out of their community, and many of these people that they were interviewing, most likely law-abiding citizens that are not breaking the law, that are not going out committing this mass theft, because they're going to these places because they know as long as they're doing what they're supposed to, it's really no big a deal. But it doesn't actually matter because despite them doing what they're supposed to, it is a big deal. Because people are not speaking out enough in these communities talking about the fact of the mass crime that is plaguing these areas that is driving these businesses out. Let's go ahead and get to what the Chicago.gov has to say. This is from Mayor Johnson, his administration itself. What we see is exploring a municipally owned grocery store as part of the Johnson administration's goal of promoting food equity and accessibility for all Chicagoans. This is from the mayor's press office. Today, Mayor Brandon Johnson announced a partnership with Economic Security Project to start on a pathway towards the opening of a municipally owned grocery store in Chicago. The Economic Security Project, a national nonprofit dedicated to building economic power for all Americans, will provide technical assistance in determining a pathway to the first municipally owned grocery store in Chicago. The collaborations further the Johnson administration's work towards repairing the past harms that have contributed to purposeful disinvestment and exclusion and lack of food access in historically underserved communities. And when it talks about purposeful disinvestment, it's referencing racial discrimination from the past. But one of the purposeful disinvestments it's not talking about is the fact of businesses leaving because they're choosing to, because they have to, because if they want to remain sustainable, they cannot stay in a place where they're being robbed of all of their capacity to make profit. Moving on. All Chicagoans deserve to live near convenient, affordable, healthy grocery options. We know access to grocery stores is already a challenge for many residents, especially on the south and west sides, where it is plagued by crime, said Mayor Brandon Johnson. And he did not say plagued by crime, I said that. A better, stronger, and safer future is one where our youth and our communities have access to the tools and resources they need to thrive. Okay, well, how do we make it so we have a safer future for our youth? You have to persecute criminals, but you won't do that. My administration is committing to advancing initiatives on whole-of-government approaches to address these inequities. I am proud to work alongside partners to take this step in envisioning what a municipally owned grocery store in Chicago could look like. Historic disinvestment has led to inequitable access to food retail across Chicago, and these existing inequities have been exacerbated by at least 6 grocery stores closing on the south and west sides over the past 2 years. And why are they closing? Why don't you make any comments about that? Oh, because it goes against the progressive narrative. According to the estimates from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 63.5% of residents in West Englewood and 52% of residents in East Garfield Park live more than half a mile from the nearest grocery store, whereas in West Town, less than 1% of residents experience this barrier to food access. Moreover, food access and security link directly to environmental and racial justice. 37% of Black residents and 29% of Latinx residents are food insecure compared to 19% of residents overall. And okay, I need to make a comment about this whole thing of Latinx. I have a lot of Hispanic friends because I live in South Texas. Here's the deal. I have run this by them when they started pushing out this rhetoric of, oh, Latinx, which fundamentally defies the structure of the Hispanic language, so it already goes against that. And I asked them, yeah, what do you think about this? And I had multiple of them look me dead in my eyes and tell me, I would rather you call me a slur. Exploring initiatives from the support for food and retail as part of the Johnson administration's broader commitment to correcting systems and practices that have created these inequities. But these people are nothing more than progressive socialist types, and they don't understand how to actually approach inequities by using the market, and they think that the hand of the government is the way to do so. Rather than using the soft hand of the market, they prefer the claws of the state. Moving on to an article, what we see is centrally ignored costs is the main thing that will be the first topic of conversation when we are talking about the problem with municipally owned grocery stores. How would a city run a grocery store compared to a private alternative? The main difference between private and government-run services comes down to one word: profit. Privately run grocery stores have an incentive to make the most profit possible. Profit is simply the difference between the total number of dollars a store receives and the total amount of dollars the store spends. Maximizing profit means trying to maximize the difference between revenue and expenses. For any given amount of sales, stores want the lowest cost possible. Private businesses want to buy the minimal amount of labor and inventory while maintaining the highest revenues. This drive to minimize costs is a good thing for society. Every worker and machine used in a grocery store is a worker and machine that cannot be used anywhere else in the economy. Inputs in the production process are scarce, so less inputs the stores use are far better. For-profit businesses are necessarily conservationists of society's resources because they use every single resource, and anything used unnecessarily is money out of the pocket of the business owner. No such logic operates in government-run production, however. There are no profits or losses in municipally operated businesses. This means two things. First, there is no accounting for the value of the assets a business owns and uses in production. How much value are government cash registers producing on net? Without profit, there is no method for being able to tell if they're valuable to have. Without the knowledge of profit and loss, there is no incentive for municipally owned operations to keep costs down. Remember, in for-profit stores, every dollar of input wasted means a dollar out of the pocket of the owners. What about if a dollar of input is wasted in a city-owned store? Well, the dollar doesn't come out of the politician's pocket. It comes out of, wait for it, your pocket, the taxpayer. Ultimately, the cost of the grocery store will be borne and funded by the taxpayer. So the problem of the municipally owned grocery store is twofold. First, the government-owned grocery store will buy and use scarce inputs, but it cannot use knowledge about profits and losses to know if the value created from the input is greater than the cost of using the input. Society's scarce resources will be wasted. Second, there is no incentive for government-run grocery stores to cut costs because the costs are all covered by the taxpayer. The true danger. A common claim is seen from right-wing critics that the policy is to laugh at the possibility of saying that this will result in a grocery store with DMV levels of efficiency. They imagine empty shelves, long lines, and bad customer service. To this point, many conservative commentators have also invoked the famous story of the Soviet Union leader Boris Yeltsin's 1989 trip to a Texas grocery store, that being a food town. Well, it is now a food town. It was a Randall's, and it is now a food town. I have been there. It's in Clear Lake. It's genuinely heart-wrenching to see this. And then you see the photos of Boris Yeltsin afterward where he's on the plane, and he's got his head in his hands, and he's just sitting there wondering, how is it that we've come to this? How is it that they were able to keep so many people in the dark about what these other countries were living under? And by living under, I mean living under prosperity, because the lies that were told in the Soviet Union about places like the United States is that they were starving, they were destitute, they were poor, they lived in bombed out shelters, everything in the United States was decaying, the culture was destroyed, the people had no respect for their elders, just so on and so forth. Every single piece of propaganda you could think to push and gin up against an enemy nation that would effectively denigrate the value of them as individuals in your eyes, so you would never seek to look abroad for the answers to solve the problems you have at home. And with that, you can go ahead and look at the pictures of Boris Yeltsin. Go ahead and look him up. And it's genuinely tragic. He's looking at the food in the grocery stores, and he goes on consistently thinking the fact that it was staged. And he thought it was staged because there was so much plentiful food everywhere. He walked in and there was a bowl, and the bowl said, "Free fruit for children." And this is something that if you're someone that lives in the United States and you've been to grocery stores around the United States, before COVID happened, there were bowls when you would walk into grocery stores that said free food for kids. And this is something that was so drastic in comparison to what the people in the Soviet Union had to deal with that it was almost unimaginable. And this goes with something that I was told when I was in college. I had a friend named Oleg, and he was from Russia. And he lived in the Soviet Union, and his family suffered under the plight of communism. And what he told me was what it was like when him and his family came here, and they came to Houston, and they walked into a grocery store, and they actually came here because of Boris Yeltsin. So this is like an incredible story that ties so many people's understanding of leaving communism to flee to the West to find freedom and a better life. And what he told me was when he walked in and he saw that there was free fruit for children, they saw the fresh produce everywhere, shelves stocked with food endlessly. And he said that his mom started to cry. And he realized that free fruit for children meant that he could just grab a banana and go. And in Russia, what they had done is they were peeling the skin off of grapes so that they could make them last longer, because that was their dessert, was a grape. And if you think you have it bad, I want you to think about the understanding of what people who suffer under the plight of government control of food had to deal with. And that is what they are pushing in places like Chicago. Moving on, it says, to this point, many conservative commentators have invoked the famous story of the Soviet Union, which I just explained. As the story goes, Yeltsin visited a grocery store and was enamored by the wide selection of food available. The wide range of choice and quantity of food in the U.S. destroyed any argument that the centrally planned stores in the USSR could do better. Yeltsin was so shocked he assumed it must have been staged. Okay, there we go. The episode apparently had a big impact on his decision to liberalize the Russian economy through the 1990s, but right-wing commentators are wrong to use this story as an example of their point. While it may be the case that Chicago's city grocery stores will eventually be terrible in this way, there's no reason to accept them to look bad in the short term. And that's absolutely true, because it will look fine in the beginning. Everything will be great because it will be so funded limitlessly by the taxpayer. But in the end, when this starts to crumble, what you'll see is that the machinations of government top-down control always fail. Here we see, to wonder why the difference between the USSR and Chicago is, the USSR, despite some illusory economic data, was a poor country. When the centrally planned grocery stores failed to operate efficiently, there was no great pile of wealth for Soviet government to draw from to support them. There was no masking the inefficiency of socialism in the USSR. But what they can do is mask the inefficiency of socialism in the United States by using the government taxpayers, because they can print limitless money if they're not taxing you, which means they can consistently subsidize these things without having to worry about presenting the image to you that we are an empire in decline. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thank you for watching if you got this far. Don't ever let the metrics of socialism overtake the free market economy, because if so, we will live poor and destitute like that of the people who suffered in the Soviet Union. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. All the resources will be in the link in the description as per usual. Stay lovely, stay great. Peace out.